the Goose Creek portion of the Wells Elk SubPlan. Larry.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, for the record, Larry Gilbertson, Nevada Department of Wildlife, Game Division. Okay, the agenda item is the Goose Creek portion of the Wells Elk Amendment, which is a subplan for management of elk, pretty much in the eastern half of Elko County. The history of this, if I remember correctly, is sportsmen in Elko County brought this forward about in 2007. They were asking to initiate a steering committee and a planning process in Elko County, which is consistent with the Board of Wildlife Commissioners, Elk Species Management Plan Committee, Elk SubPlan Initiation, and Elk SubPlan Revision process. And that process was set up by a subcommittee of the Commission to be consistent with the Elk Species Management Plan, which was completed in 1997. And that plan calls for using local groups and having management subplan revision processes occurring at the local level, and it even specifies in here that that planning process will occur in the town closest to the subplan. So in this case, it's Elko. The sportsmen, many, I don't know, I don't even hardly know where to start, but all of the elk planning processes in the past took a lot of time. The Elk Species Management Plan itself took a couple of years to get it done. The White Pine Elk Plan took about 4 years to write. The Central Nevada Elk Plan took about 4 years. The Wells process that we're talking about here today took over 2 years. The Bruno process, I was involved with almost all of these, that's why I remember. The Bruno took a couple of years, and the Jarbidge took a couple of years. I don't know if I already mentioned Western Elko County. That one took, I think, a little over between 2 and 3. And then we've had revision processes. A lot of these plans called for certain revision processes at a 10-year timetable or something like that. And we've had a couple of those. The White Pine revision process took 3.5 years. So it took 4 years to write it and 3.5 years to revise it. And we essentially didn't change anything. We're still managing elk the same commitments, same numbers. We added on the Grant Quinn range to the White Pine area. We didn't increase any numbers. We just included unit 132 with 131 is what ended up happening. We're managing the entire thing as a unit now. So the commission saw that these revision processes were taking almost as long as the initial plan. And so they wanted to try to revise the process to streamline it more and make it more efficient. And so that's why the attachment that you have shows the process. And many of the sportsmen who pushed for this newest revision in the Goose Creek portion were members of some of these original planning teams. So they've gone through these years of planning, and they know the details of the plans as well as anyone. And so in the Wells decision of record, the final decision the BLM made, it said that any adjustments in elk numbers or objective levels would be based on monitoring. And most of the elk plans say that. And adjustments in the objective level, obviously, that means they can go up or down, and they'll be based on monitoring. There's other safeguards in the elk species plan and in most subplans, various things that direct us to coordinate and cooperate with the local landowners, with the livestock permittees, with the federal agencies. So there's that level of collaboration that must occur. The elk species plan itself says that elk will not be managed at the expense of mule deer and sage grouse. The Wells plan says that vegetation projects that we consider for improvement of range out there will take livestock and mule deer into consideration over the values of elk. So that's kind of interesting. That's why we need to, as a department, we're committed to working with the federal agencies and the grazers out there to manage elk. The other commitment was to make, I already mentioned it, was to make sure that these planning processes occur at the local level. And in here, it gives you that list of potential members for the subcommittees. And it lists all the different groups that would be involved. And as you see, you know, there's Nevada Cattlemen, Nevada Wool Growers, Farm Bureau. So agriculture is represented in here in various places, and along with the agencies, of course. So now we're at the point, in 2007, sportsmen knew who wanted the revision, and for the Goose Creek portion, and the Wells Resource Area has, I believe it's 6 subdivisions. It's broken out into it's a bunch of different areas. And the Wells is most of that country in the northeast corner. It's east of 93 and pretty much north of I-80, out to the Toanos now, and up through, it doesn't include Pilot Peak is all. The sportsmen knew that in the Wells plan, that it said that monitoring would be the data used to either increase or decrease elk. So they knew that they had to work with the BLM in order to get that monitoring data. And the sportsmen funded, because the BLM didn't have money to go out and do the monitoring themselves, sportsmen funded BLM, and the BLM hired a contractor to do the actual monitoring out there. The report that came back from that is probably one of the reasons there's been some controversy. That report suggested that the report didn't find conflicts with elk use on the range, and it didn't show where elk were causing the BLM not to reach the goals and objectives in their land use plan for vegetation use, and that they weren't finding any overuse areas by elk. And the person who wrote it even suggested a number. The initial number for the in the Wells Elk plan for that area was 1,070, and a recent adjustment in the Pilot area, we divided Pilot Peak from the North Toanos, and it had a 250, and I think I informed this commission about a year ago that out of that 250, we were going to leave 150 on Pilot, and another 100 was going to go to the North Toanos. So the number for that Goose Creek area right now is, that makes it 1,170. So, but the report that came out suggested well over 2,200, I think it said 2,600, that this person thought could be out there without causing damage. So that's caused a lot of consternation that we were suddenly going to go out and double elk out there. That is not the intent, from what I understand. There's been meetings that we weren't involved with. There's some people in here that know more about it than I do in terms of the meetings that have gone on with sportsmen and livestock people discussing the issue. So we have to follow this elk subplan revision process. And the last step that Chairman Lent pointed out that we didn't have evidence of was the collaboration with the federal land managers. And it says right in here that we would do that, of course, and we fully expected to do that. So we have sat down with the Elko District of the BLM, and they've written a letter that they support the planning process, because that's all it is. It's a local planning process. And if you decide to go forward with it, we would recommend to get all of it, as many of the original members involved in the steering committee as we possibly could, and invite anybody else that shows interest from that area to participate. So I guess that's the point we're at right now, is that we're going to decide whether you want to go forward or not go forward with this planning process.
Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, the way I understood it, and from my memory, is we weren't the BLM and the Forest Service, whoever ones were dealing with the land management agency. They decide if there's a need on their land if we go forward. And according to A on this thing, it says the director will apprise the commission when NDOW documents the need for a new elk plan. So are you telling us there's a need for a new elk plan? If you are, then we have to go and appoint a steering committee within 3 months. But did you have any correspondence from the land managers? Is there a need to do this now? And if you say there's a need to do it now, then we'll go forward with it.
Well, the need is a pretty broad term. In this instance, it would be, the need is that there's an interest from the public that brought it forward, that they are interested in seeing a revision of the Goose Creek portion of the plan to look at elk numbers out there. And so the need is to address the public interest in the elk planning process. And so we would bring it forward at this point after collaborating with the BLM, and they've also given us a letter, which I have copies of if people would like to see it, that they support the process as long as they're part of that steering committee and they have input, and they will definitely provide input through the process. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, I didn't want to go to this long process, because I know what it was before, years and years, and then we never came up with any solutions. And to put the expense and all the people through this, and to keep them interested, even the original members, is going to be a long, drawn-out process. And I didn't want to implement that unless there's really a need to do it, where you guys say there's need and the land agencies say there's a need, and if there is, then we'll go ahead and implement it. And
well, you know, that was the reason for this process, is because, like I described earlier, it took as much as 3.5 years. And really, I've been through so many of these processes. What normally was the thing that held everything up was actually talking about the numbers. How many elk are we going to have or not have out there? And boy, I'll tell you, we talk about everything from sunspots to global warming to anything you can imagine. And we'd go meeting after meeting after meeting. And that's what really took so long, is we would cuss and discuss everything under the sun. Finally, we'd get near, well, it's been 3 years, let's get a decision. We'd talk numbers and get it over with. So this process, as you see in here, it gives timelines for getting it established, timelines for us getting a draft ready. And it also, the other thing it did is it narrowed the focus. And what happened, for instance, in the White Pine one, is it just said we'll revise the whole plan. So you put a committee together and they feel a need to do a job. And we went line by line, sentence by sentence, phrase by phrase. We wordsmith, we changed things, we argued over the meaning of a word. It took 3.5 years. This new process is they want to talk, and you need to focus it down more. They want to talk about elk numbers. So that's the thing that was always last, that's up front. The revision process is that we want to get in there, discuss whether we should or shouldn't about elk numbers in the Goose Creek area, not the whole plan. And that it should narrow it down. It should streamline the process and make it go way faster than it ever did before. And in fact, there's timelines in here. I believe it's not supposed to go over 6 months after they get together. So hopefully it would be a lot. The process has never been implemented yet, and hopefully it would work as smoothly as that. We'll see.
okay, Commissioner Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I was reading that there in subsection A, it's fairly specific about what is the need. Nevada Department of Wildlife documents the need, and that need does not, to me, seem to include because there's interest from the public. It spells it right out. The need for new subplan either because elk have become established or an opportunity has been identified to establish elk in a previously unoccupied area of the state. So, question is have elk become established or has an opportunity been identified to establish elk in a previously unoccupied area of the state?
Wait a second.
That's actually in the first section. That's in the section that has to do with a new elk plan.
Yeah.
And on page 3, what we're looking at is the elk subplan revision. And in the revision, it says that when the Nevada Department of Wildlife documents the need for an elk subplan revision to address changing conditions or documented concerns, NDOW shall collaborate and come forward. And the idea there was, if you have problems that need to be addressed, we need to fix them. If we have opportunities, that would be changing conditions that we would like to take advantage of. It gives either side of the fence the opportunity to come forward, initiate a planning process, and see if we can take advantage of the changing conditions and the opportunities, or If we have problems and things aren't working, we need to fix it and change it and reduce numbers or do something else. So that was the intent of the committee.
Okay.
Any other comments from the commissioners before I turn it over to Commissioner McBeth?
Larry, with respect to the report that came back from that contractor at the BLM, just so I understand it, they said that it could support up to 2,600 elk?
Yeah, but
And did that take into account the permittees that are on those areas?
that was based on the areas where the vegetation monitoring occurred. And the interesting thing about the whole elk planning process, the Wells Elk Plan process, for instance, when we got into that, we looked at all the potential elk habitat in the entire eastern half of Elko County. And we looked at, drew polygons on a map, and close to water, say within 3 miles, would be high quality elk habitat. And then as you get further from water, it would be moderate. And then way out in the valleys and places that it might only be used in the winter would be low density. And we assigned numbers to those polygons, elk per square mile, based on elk densities in adjacent habitats in Utah and Idaho. And that's the process identified in the elk species management plan to go forward with. So if you just look at raw numbers for the Wells resource area, the numbers came out that we could have about 12,000 elk in that plan area. Then we went in there and pretty much we eliminated all of that good habitat because it's close to riparian. And we said that's where we already have conflicts. Now, it doesn't mean the elk won't go there, but what it means is when we went to figure out the number, the final number, we took all of the good stuff out because it was close to water, already conflict area. We didn't count that. We modified, we took all the private land out. We looked at the other needs that were out there and reduced the number from 12,000 down to only 2,200. So that was our initial starting point in the Wells plan, is after we took all the things you're thinking about into consideration. And so now we have to look at monitoring to decide whether to go forward or not.
I'm going to turn it over to public comment here, and then we'll bring it back to the commission.
We had Paul Dixon, followed by John Larkin. No Paul Dixon, John Larkin.
I'm a lifelong rancher. John W. Larkin. I'm the owner and operator of Trout Creek Ranches LLC. I'm also here to speak with my neighbor, who's a large rancher, Bidkey Savvy Inc., about the elk population in northeast corner of Nevada. We're right in that tri-state area. Nobody knows how many elk's there. When they go to count them, they're moving into Idaho and Utah and Nevada constantly. In 2007, we had a fire. Started on my ranch and burned up 90% of the deeded ground and the BLM ground. The elk have been increasing yearly in that area ever since at least 2003. We've had an increase in elk numbers. And if you hire somebody to do the monitoring, you're paying them, they're going to give you whatever number you ask for. Larry was up to my ranch in 2008 with Kerry Hubner. My cattle were all off that ranch for 2 years, from July 23rd of 07 for all of the rest of that year, 08 and 09, most of 09. Excuse me, all the fences were burned down. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, we just finished up all the fencing on that ranch, which was miles. Larry and Kerry and me and my ranch foreman went for a drive in 2008. He was surprised how the ranch had came back. Never seen one cow, but we seen some big herds of elk. I had an elk ranch. My ranch was devastated the worst. A fire started on my ranch and burnt most of my ranch up. And you seen the elk. I like Larry. Yeah, you know, he tells it like it is. What?
Great work out there. It sucked it right in.
And they have not left. At any time, I can see herds of elk, 100-200 head in a herd. The elk hunters, I'm not here to get rid of all elk. They were there before I was there. And I'm not here to run off hunters. I'm here to have livestock and elk or anything else on the land that'll keep the land sustainable with the resources, which includes water. I want that ranch and that land to be better when I'm gone than it is now. So that only means we can have so many animals in a certain spot. I don't want one more animal of mine on a ranch that hasn't got plenty of forage. And I feel the same way about the elk. We have spent miles of money on fences. We started building fences immediately the fall of 2007. My crews, we spent considerably money, and I have seen some fences that was brand new in 2007 that elk have been through, loosened the wires. When you get elk concentrated in that big of numbers, they take out fences. One thing I am here to report, the deer herd is increased. There was very few deer before the fire. And I'm glad to see the deer herd is really coming back on the ranch. But we've got to keep the elk down to a manageable number for the resources we have available. And we're over. I do not know the exact head count, but I do know they can't count those in that corner and get a decent head count on them flying one day. Especially into Idaho, it's good country like our country in the northern part there. Them elk move into Idaho. For instance, when the fire was on, me and my crew fought cattle off Bald Mountain in the middle of the night, come in and got them into the black and down where something hadn't burned. We left a sizable number of cows and mother cows and calves on that near Goose Creek. Probably left them there about 1 o'clock in the night. I went back over there at daybreak the next morning. Them elk had followed us out and they was scattered out with the cattle just like they was cows. I went back after that evening and every one of them elk had moved into Idaho. They were gone. Another problem we have there is water. We can water the elk fine till July, or we get into maybe even the 1st of August on some years. Our stock ponds will hold up. But from then on, I've spent considerably money on water lines. We're spending some considerable money right now on solar panels and solar pumps to pump our wells. And we're having trouble watering all the elk and our livestock when we get later in the year. And in some cases, we've had to haul water because we're watering all those elk. Deer, like I stated, is not a problem. They jump fences. They eat different than elk. We have considerable antelope there. And we can sustain some elk. But we can't sustain, in that particular corner, it's the best summer country, I would say, or as good a summer country as there is in Nevada. Is that the-
Some of the best in that piece of country for sure.
So, if I'm an elk, I don't stay down on Pilot Mountain or over on 93 or down in the desert. You wouldn't, I wouldn't. We're gonna be up in that good country. And with reasonable management, I think we can have but we cannot have all the elk in that unit on 2 or 3 ranches in the northeast corner of Nevada and moving back and forth into Idaho. Nobody, there's a few ways that could be managed there better. One way is we need the season, elk hunting season, to open in Utah, Idaho, and Nevada at the same time. All they do is open. I'm not a hunter. I gotta work, so I don't go hunting. I don't even know much about it, but I don't have anything against hunters. That's their right. But they open the hunt, I think, in Utah first, and what a few elks in Utah, they drive them on us. And then they start the hunt, I think, and you people know better than me. I think it's in September or October in Idaho. And Idaho has got some good country to the north of us, just like ours, and there's a lot of elk in there. They drive them into Nevada then, and I think November 2nd or something is the Nevada hunt. Is that right or wrong?
We have some of the elk season, John.
Okay, well, you got a lot of different, well, and you've got different areas, I imagine, open up different in the state.
From August to December, pretty much.
But anyway, up in that area, we need to have the elk hunt in all 3 states in that corner to open at the same time. And another problem we have up in that area, we have some hunters come in there and good guides and that, but the only thing they want's the trophy elk. And they have diminished the trophy elk. In the last 5 years, I would say the trophy elk have been hunted out pretty good. So the people that have got the resources to hunt a trophy elk, you know, they're not coming back. And I don't think that the elk numbers can be kept in touch up there just by hunting. They had a cow hunt, a special cow hunt. It was mainly on my ranch. It might have been, I'm not sure how the boundary was really drew. Was that last year or the year before? That's what my recollection
Hey,
tells.
John, I think you made your point, but this is stuff that, this information that you have here about the seasons, that would be better if the plan is open. That would be good testimony for the plan when it's open. But, you know, I just wanted to make your point on this plan here. But, you know, as far as the season opening and that's good stuff that would be into the implement in the plan.
I don't want to take your time any more than I need. I just know that we can't handle any more elk up there, and I'm don't think anybody knows how many elk's there. There's more elk there than what this number is showing.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman? Can I just ask one question?
Commissioner Cavan?
John, so do you want the plan opened or left the way it is for the moment? What's your?
I want it left the way it is for the moment.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask you, if it is open, would you serve on it and help us with it?
Well, it's quite a lot of dirt road from between here and Trout Creek, Nevada. And besides that, if I'm on a committee, there's no telephone, no cell service, no mail.
No cars.
We got wild blue internet. And pigeon carriers.
No Wi-Fi, huh?
But I would be glad to do anything I could for,
We'd appreciate having you on if it gets opened up, that's for sure.
I hope that we don't open it up with the thinking we're gonna have more elk. Because if we are, the department's gonna have to build one hell of a lot of elk fence around my meadows.
We had a question, Commissioner Howell?
John, what specific unit are we talking about where you're at?
I think it's 8.
Yeah, 076, 077, 081, 079 is a big unit.
He's all in,
John's
you're in all of
ranch
that,
is
huh?
Mostly at 081.
Mostly 081, that's what I
Yeah,
thought.
John's ranch
Okay,
is in there.
that's what I thought.
It's right up.
I don't know much about any of the numbers. All I know is the ranch and the elk. And punching cows. And I'm sure glad I ain't got my horse tied up by a hitching post when I went to one of these meetings.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Thanks you for your attention. I appreciate the commission.
Thank you. Who else you got?
That was it.
Somebody else.
The card ain't up here, we don't know who wants to speak. Who did that?
Wasn't me.
Your foot's on.
Is it,
Guess that answers the question.
Yeah. We don't need mine on anyway, do we?
For the record, Ken Wellington, Elko County Cab. We're the ones that brought this forth, and I appreciate Mr. Larkin and his comments. And that's exactly why the steering committee needs to be created, because the county board and the sportsmen I've talked to have not said, okay, let's go raise these numbers up. What we're saying is we just would like to see a steering committee created so that they can look in and review the numbers that are there. If they can, if the habitat can hold it or the area can hold it, then that steering committee can make those decisions. But this is exactly what we need to address, is problems that Mr. Larkin's having, and that's what the steering committee could do. Any other questions for me? Just wanted to make that point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the public? If hearing none, I'll close this, the public comment, bring it back to the commission, see what our livestock rep here has to say about this. Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a couple things to say about it. First of all, I think I've done my homework on this situation. I've had meetings with, in Elko with the chairman of the Elko County Commission, chairman of the Elko County Cab, also a person who sat on the original steering committee for the Wells Elk SubPlan. I've spoken I went to the endow biologist, spoke to her about the situation, Carrie Hubner. At that time, she gave me a list of 11 landowners that received incentive tags. So I'm assuming that these guys have bought into the elk system because they've received the tags. I took that list and I was able to contact 9 out of the 11 landowners. And to be fair, I asked all of the landowners that I interviewed the same questions, including how long you've owned the property, how many elk you feel you have on the property? What are the impacts of elk on the property? Is the incentive system, in your view, are you getting the correct number of tags for the number of elk? Basically, questions like that were asked to all the same questions were asked to these landowners. Of the two that I had, one that I couldn't get a hold of, and one that I spoke with the ranch manager. My findings on that were that almost unanimously there were, in their view, more elk on their property than there had been in the previous 4 years. That was my question to them. I know that this is probably a given. There were several comments that they didn't feel they received as many incentive tags as they should. And I can understand them saying that because you want to get as many of them as you can. However, with the point I want to make on this is with the incentive tags that they received, the value of them was going down. The value of the feed consumed on their property was staying the same or increasing because of increased numbers. I flew the area with the endow biologist, Carrie Hubner, to classify elk. As we were flying, I had her try to tell me who lives here, so I could get, I'd spoken to the people, and I had now we were over there right on their ranches. We classified, keep in mind, the target level in the Goose Creek area is 1070. If, what Larry said, I don't know what year they changed and added another 100 to it, which I'm not sure that that's the way it should be done, but they just threw another 100 over there. But if we use the 1070 number, we classified 1,208 elk on this flight. The population estimate, any of these figures that I give you are either taken from the endow biologist or out of this book right here. We classified the 1,208 elk. I'm not sure that we saw all the elk. We had good conditions, but I think it's probably a given that we didn't locate all of them. We did not fly in Idaho or in Utah. Mr. Larkin said that's what those elk do, is move around in that tri-state area. But anyway, I understand that these are estimated numbers. This commission has shown a well-documented commitment to increase our mule deer herds. I think the jury's still out as to the impacts of elk numbers on mule deer herds, so I went to the mule deer population estimates for those areas. And I know that Mr. Larkin said that deer had increased on his property. According to endow's estimates, for those units, mule deer are on the decline. So we have, according to endow's estimates, and I've got the figures here, elk on the increase, mule deer declining. The state of Nevada has had a 25% increase in elk numbers since 2008. The Wells resource area has had a 32% increase in elk numbers since 2008. The Goose Creek portion has had a 9% increase in elk numbers since 2008. And this area has been, according to what the biologist gave me, over the target level since 2004. So I guess, in my opinion, going back to the original monitoring, I believe that habitat monitoring is only part of the equation for total elk monitoring. Habitat monitoring has nothing to do with elk that are going to travel over the state line. They're going to have that has nothing to do with fence damage due to more elk numbers, increased hunting pressure, more increased hunting pressure would lead to more impacts to private property with gates being left open, cattle getting in the wrong spot, possible trespass on public lands, cattle, especially in these fire areas where the cattle were not allowed in there. If the elk happen to do fence damage and the cattle get in the wrong area, you're in serious trouble with BLM and Forest Service. So I guess going to that, the monitoring that was done, the habitat monitoring that suggested an increase in the numbers, that is what is behind going to this steering committee, in my belief. So in my opinion, a steering committee to look at these issues may not be the solution. A decision to reduce the elk numbers in the Goose Creek area is not advantageous to the sportsman. Leaving the numbers the same is going through a process and getting nothing accomplished, as Larry mentioned when he was speaking. Increasing numbers is not in the best interest of ranching, as we've heard, and that is my representation on this board. I checked with the cab minutes. Of all the cab minutes that I looked at, I only saw one recommendation from the cabs that supported this. And if any of the cabs are there, you can correct me on that, but that's what I found. So at this time, I cannot support the establishment of a steering committee and to look at this, and I hope that I've presented a strong enough case to persuade you guys to see it the same way. And Mr. Chairman, whenever the appropriate time is, I'm prepared to make a motion.
I'll let you make a motion. Let me ask you a question. If we have, what you're saying is more elk in there than what the Department of Surveying, wouldn't be beneficial to open up and resurvey them and if we do have more, to prove it, and that means we'd have to do a herd reduction or something? If that's true, how are we gonna resolve it? If there's too many elk and we don't open up in their inventory, what are we gonna do?
I'm not saying that there are more elk in there than what the department figures show, because I do believe that the biologist made a conscious effort. I was with her. We flew. She knows where those animals generally are. We had snow. We had good conditions to get a good count on the elk. And I know that these population estimates, that's what it is, an estimate. And you can see that a lot of these figures are rounded off, 1,200 head, and that's fine. All I'm saying is there is potential that there's more elk than the 1,200 that we actually classified, 1,208.
Wouldn't we want to know that then?
We probably would. I know that there's only so much budget to, so much time to fly and all that stuff. I don't know, how much extra flying time. That's an end-out question.
Let me ask Larry a question. The purpose of this opening it up would not be to increase the numbers of elk in the area, is it?
The purpose is to discuss those elk numbers, because that's what the sportsmen are interested in. And we kind of told them up front, it's a two-way street. You don't know which way it'll go. It depends on the information that comes forward and the decisions that are made. So you're right, it could go either way.
Commissioner McBeth?
What was the basis for coming up with the original 1070, that number? What were the findings of the original committee, to arrive at that number? What was it based solely on habitat, or did it take into account the conflicts with the permittees and other private landowners? I'm just curious how that number came up.
Yeah, that was that process I described earlier, where we started out with 12,000 elk, and then they took out, like I said, all of the private land. And Elko County has a lot of private land. It's one, like in Lincoln and White Pine, we're talking 97-ish% public land. In Elko County, it's closer to 70-30. So there's a lot of checkerboard land and other private land. So when we started with that 12,000, and this was, this whole committee and the BLM had a lot. Actually, the committee got it down to 3,300, and then the BLM went back to their state office and looked at more issues that had to do with the livestock numbers, issues out there like that, and they came back with a recommendation of 2,200. And then that 2,200 was divided among 6 areas. And we talk about numbers floating around. At one point, we had, it was either 250 or 300 elk identified for the snake range that's just north of Wells. It's a little unit by itself. And after lunch, 150 of those were actually tossed over onto this side with the 1070. And then the other 100 that we threw in there, they're not really throwing up into Goose Creek. The other 100 is in the North Toanos. Originally, there was a number of 250 elk, and it included Pilot Peak and across the valleys in North Toano Range. And so there was 250 elk for that area. And recently, because of the elk movements we've documented with radio collared elk and other things, the North Toanos is tied more to the elk are going back and forth to those other units rather than Pilot. They seem to be separate. And Pilot we manage separately with Utah. So we just made that division there, and so those 100 head really would be expected to be accounted for more in the in North Toanos than in the rest of the area, and the other 150 to be left with Pilot. So that's how those numbers, they just got reduced. Like I said, we took out the land that was within a few miles of riparian habitat because it was a high conflict area. We didn't use those numbers, and those would have been the highest elk numbers for that calculation. Took those right out, took the private land out. I wish the BLM guy here, Ray Lister, he had it down pat. They took out just a number of different polygons and pieces of the country to go from that 12,000 down to 2,200. I mean, you can see it was reduced, and we were happy with it because as an agency, we wanted to be able to stay on top of the numbers. We didn't want to start crazy with these super high numbers. We had that fund building up. We wanted to be able to handle depredation problems. And we built a couple of fences. We've got a fence up in that Trout Creek country on one of the ranches up there, and we built a fence at 12 Mile Ranch. And to back up what John pointed out, we were having trouble at 18 Mile Field, which is also on Wine Cup Gamble land, a few years ago, where there was about 150 to 200 elk hanging out on some fields they were putting in, and we thought we were gonna have to fence that. And then John's country burned up, and it seems to have pulled those elk up there because we haven't heard from them on that field for 2 years now. So they have pulled up in that country, and thanks for solving that problem for a while, but I'm not sure it'll be forever because we've had some burns over across in 076 too, and that country's coming on pretty strong now, and that may draw some of the elk back. And we've also tried to separate out 081 by itself for cow hunting, and as you know, we increased quota recommendations this year, and the season process is coming up this year, and we plan to come forward with some even more innovative or extended type hunting seasons this year. We're looking into that already and planning for that. So we expect to harvest more aggressively up there to deal with those numbers. And to back up more of what John said about the elk movement, we've radio collared several big groups of elk up there. We've got groups of between 100 and 200 that do spend a lot of their time, 6 months of the year almost, in Idaho and Utah, and then they come into Nevada. And that's why we fly in February, because most of the elk end up in Nevada or pretty close to Nevada in the winter, and that's why we count in the winter. But a lot of those elk do go into Idaho. And John wasn't here yesterday, but I brought it up in front of the Elk Damage Incentive Committee that we had a tri-state meeting with Utah and Idaho, and we are going to try to coordinate seasons up there a lot better. And Idaho has you have a representative in Idaho that is a Bedke, Scott Bedke, and he pointed out that Idaho has this landowner tag, this situation where if elk show up on your property in Idaho, Idaho gives them tags, not really tags, but it's a landowner permission slip, and they'll say you can have 15 or 20 of these, and then the landowner can give those permission slips, like we do with our turkey hunt, to individuals to go buy a tag and go take care of elk that showed up on their meadows or whatever. And so that's a process that the committee wants to pursue. It's a decision they want to pursue and look at that. So we're looking at ways that we can deal with some of these issues and try to help out. So this planning process could help us with that too, so.
And Larry, just to follow up, so the process of determining the new number, if we were to appoint a steering committee, would be that same process?
If we.
In other words, arriving at the number would be the same process, starting with maybe adjusting the top number, 12,000, and basically.
Well, now what we're talking about here is just the Goose Creek area, and that's that 1170 really is what we're talking about, and so we're not looking at the 12,000. That was just an initial evaluation of what could be out there. But that's if everybody just loved elk so much that they just wanted to maximize elk, including the landowners. That's not real. That was just the initial number. So we're not even looking at that. We're starting with where we're at and our history and our record of keeping up with problems and the whole thing, and we'll just adjust from that number. We're not.
Okay, but
there's no goal out there.
It could be more than just habitat or the ability to support more elk. It could be, the amount of damage claims that, for instance, the ranchers in the area and are going to file because their fences are.
Certainly, that's why I was hoping you guys could talk John into participating, because, the sportsmen are rightfully excited because they worked with the BLM, and that's why we don't do the monitoring, because obviously, if we're doing the monitoring, they'd go, sure, we hired somebody who was our buddy or something. So the BLM's in charge of the forage management out there, the vegetation management. So that's why the BLM hired the contractor, and the sportsmen helped pay for it. So, that's why John needs to bring his issues to the committee, because the sportsmen are excited that there's an opportunity maybe to increase elk, but they also have to have the other side. And the last time we looked at a revision process was, I moved up to Elko in the early 90s, and we were looking, it was also in the Wells Elk planned area, and we were looking at that Snake Mountain area. And one of the ranchers was the president of the Cattlemen's Association at the time, and we had two other ranchers who showed up at this planning meeting, same kind of meeting we're talking about, that were both previous presidents of the Cattlemen's Association, but they're all three landowners in there. And they discussed various issues that John's talking about. And when it finally came out, the guy that was the leader at the time of the Cattlemen's Association said, well, on my ranch, and he flat out just said it to the whole group, on my ranch, I don't have problems with elk, and I wouldn't mind seeing more, but as you see, my neighbors aren't comfortable with it, and I just can't support it. And that meeting kind of just went, that was it. Everybody said, okay, well, I guess we're not going to go. And so that, we didn't increase numbers. That was the end of that planning process. And this one can go there. There's no way to predict. It could go to where people have identified problems that they think we need to reduce numbers some. Who knows? Who knows where it'll go? So I have no predictions and no real druthers, but I'm here to participate and go whichever way people would like it to go, so.
I have a question, Ken.
Well, that is something we can address fence problems. If
hey,
you're having fence
Larry,
problems.
I brought it back to
I'm sorry.
Commissioner McBeth.
Okay. Ken, having heard all of this, and as the chairman of the Elko Cab, and understanding there may be a risk that that this process may not necessarily work in the sportsman's favor, what are you thinking? Are you you're willing to take the risk and do the steering committee and see how it goes, or what do you think?
For the record, Ken Wellington, Elko County. When we first brought this forth, I believe it was in 2008, to the commission, we explained to the commission at that time, we understand that there's a chance that it could go the other way and that we could lose elk. And our whole goal is to enhance wildlife. And if it means lowering the herd numbers, then so be it. If it means raising it, then so be it. But we're comfortable with either way that goes. We just want to make sure everything gets out on the table.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things that when we had this up a while back, I wasn't going to bring it up until, and the way the plan says, NDOW collaborates with the federal land managers, BLM to verify the need to initiate an elk subplan revision process, advise the director. And then the NDOW documents the need for this revision. And what they're saying is they documented a need with the BLM, which allows us to go forward with this. And that's what the plan says. And so if that's the case, then I have no problems doing that, but I will let Commissioner Moore make a motion, since he's a cattleman's rep on this, when we're ready to do it. But it could go either way, and if there's too many elk or too few of elk, we're gonna find out. And it's a long process, but it's a 6-month, I think we got a limitation, and I think the department is very interested in doing this, and we're gonna follow the process, if that's what the process is. But, you know, we've had all this discussion. I think I'm ready for a motion of some type, and I'll let Commissioner Moore make a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think from what I've heard here, it probably comes down to odds, and this is one thing where I disagree with Ken on the chairman of the Elko Cab. If you're going to enter into a fight, and you weigh 200 pounds and the guy you're fighting weighs 100 pounds, naturally you may want to go right ahead and enter into that fight. And I guess I'm the 100-pounder that's not, I don't have real confidence that this steering committee, through all this process, is going to leave those numbers the same or reduce them for that man standing right over there. And at the end of the day, that guy's the one that's going to be feeding the elk. So I will make a motion to deny the request to set up a steering committee to revise the elk population objective of the Goose Creek portion of the Wells Elk SubPlan.
Second that.
Who seconded? Okay. We have a motion to deny the revision of the Goose Creek elk plan, and we have a second. Do we have any further discussion of it? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All for the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Me? Okay. I'm opposed. Okay, raise the hands of the ones for it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? 3 opposed, motion passes. Thank you.
Can we take a break?
You want to let's take